Hello and welcome back to the channel. Thank you for joining me in another of my wonderful interviews. You're somebody who have recently gone into the NHS, one of the hospitals there, and had an operation, or perhaps just had a checkup, or you had something and you didn't know quite what. And if you come away and thought, it's interesting, the hospitals have changed over the years, haven't they? They certainly have changed. I haven't been in a hospital, I have to say, for a long time, and probably wouldn't get me in unless I've actually had a road traffic accident, and that's because I'm quite suspicious. Well, how would it be if a book was posted to you, as it was to me, I have to say, some time ago, to say, Richard, I've written this book, it's a fantastic book, you should read it. And I looked at 800 pages and I thought, no, that's my kind of book. And I have to say that I haven't managed to read all of it, but I have read some of it. And there's some very interesting points in this book. The genius, of course, is writing a fictional book that is full of bombshells, of truth bombs, in which you suddenly go, oh, hang on a minute. This ain't as fictional as it looks. Well, this is what my guest today has done. We're going to talk about being a doctor, a GP, and the NHS, what's happened to it, where it went, and all of that. It's going to be fantastic. His name is Dr. Paul Hobday, and he joins me now. Hello, Paul.
Hello, Richard. Good to see you.
It's good to see you. Thank you for sending me this book. The postage alone must have been been
Yes.
significant. 800 pages now. Disclosure here, I'm in the process of writing a book myself, and that's why I was asking you how long it took and some questions before we started to record. And again, I'm writing with some what I think to be truth bombs in a fictional story. It does mean you can get away with murder, as it were, by writing a story that's fictional, because nobody can say it's all lies, because it's all a lie, because it's fiction, as it were. But actually, your book is full of fascinating truths which people hopefully will recognise. Is that a fair summing up?
It's a very good summary. Absolutely. When you wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning fuming about what the politicians are doing, particularly in your particular field, and mine was the NHS for 30 or 35 years, you realise it's not good for your health. You have to do something about it. And my solution was to get this down on paper, and it was very therapeutic. It was designed really just to get a message across. The message being, wake up, everybody. Your NHS is disappearing. It's being dismantled. And do something about it if you really value the NHS. And as you've hinted, if it's a bit too long to read, just go to chapter 18. That explains the blueprint for how exactly this has happened over the years.
I should just say it's called, because I'm just aware that I didn't give the title, The Deceit Syndrome, which people may recognise refers to an event that may have happened 5 years ago or something along those lines.
Well, it's deceitful what they've been doing, and the syndrome is just part of it. And when you get to the end, you'll see the whole thing explained. The
Yeah.
subtitle Catch 69 is a combination. Everybody knows of Catch 22, but do you know Catch 23 and Catch 24?
No.
They're things, and if you add them together, it comes to Catch 69. It's a bit convoluted, but that's what we get to towards the end. One thing that struck me over the years was how the workers at the coalface, in other words, I'm talking here at GPs,
Mm.
they have their head down. They're trying to pay the mortgage. They're not trying to. They don't want to get into trouble. And the majority, really, like the general public, really don't know what's going on and what has been going on. I've been always very interested in your shows, Richard, and they've all been very fascinating, actually. I have to say, a lot of them go over my head, particularly the financial experts. But the one thing I've noticed or thought about that's in common with them all is that most of the workers at the coalface, those at the bottom of the food chain, haven't really got a clue what's going on and what is done in their name.
Mm.
For instance, the bank clerk. Does the bank clerk really know what their bank is doing and how it's operating? The
No.
lowly civil servant, do they really know what they're doing on behalf of the government? Or the police constable? Does he really know what corruption there might be at the higher levels. And the same goes for the NHS. I believe that although doctors and nurses, particularly doctors, have come in for a lot of flack, um, basically they do as they're told, they get on with it. They have very little idea, like the public, about the corporatization, the commercialization, and the Americanization of what's going on. And that a good example was COVID. Most NHS staff and most doctors got most of their, you can hardly credit this, got most of their information about COVID from the media. They didn't get it from journals. They didn't get it from factual things. They were no better off than
Yes.
the general public. And the media, of course, feed the government, and the government feed the media. And the government have big business feeding them, and big pharma and corporations, and then it goes back to the media. So it's a cycle of events, really.
And didn't we see the narrative being played there absolutely in lockstep? At no point did the media do a real questioning of what was really going on, particularly when a certain medical intervention came out.
Absolutely. And have you ever heard them drill down as to what is happening for the NHS? The deepest they go is talking about funding. And when it comes to an election, there is, this party is going to spend more than that party, and where's the money coming from? There's never a debate about the direction of the NHS, who's providing the services, is that a good idea? The media are complicit in the destruction and dismantling of the NHS, and that's partly because a lot of the media is owned by the same people, of course.
Yes, absolutely. Well, let's start with you then, Paul, and find out a bit about why you and how you became a GP and how you got into the system. Because one thing that people of my age, and certainly a number of my viewers who share the similar age, is we do remember the days when you had a family doctor who knew you, who knew your children, and you would go to with your ailments and various things, and everybody, we all got on very fine. And slowly, all of that sort of started to change, in which you're in a waiting room and it's pot luck who you get to see when you turn up. So tell us about yourself and being a GP and that sort of process.
I'll start at the end. Right.
Yes, okay.
Just before I retired, I was in the same village practice for 30 something years. I dealt with up to 4 generations of the same family. The continuity of care was excellent. There was hardly a patient that walked through the door that I hadn't seen before. They knew me, I knew them, and that
Yes.
put up trust. If you haven't got trust, you really can't function very well as a doctor. The trust, I can give you a simple example. If a patient that I'd seen dozens of times came in to see me, I knew their family with a headache, and I diagnosed it after examining, and it was a migraine or something fairly simple. They went out very happy. Nowadays, you go in to see a doctor, you've probably never seen him before. He may diagnose that, but the patient is thinking, I think I need a scan. Give us a scan. I
Right.
might have a brain tumor. And the trust is not there if you haven't got continuity of care. And it was a deliberate policy of governments to break the doctor-patient link. Back in 2004, it was changed from you belonging to a GP in inverted commas to belonging to a practice, and that was so they could sell off practices to American corporations. Now that's how we ended up. I started. I was the only doctor in our family. I had 4 brothers. They were all brighter than me, but I was the only one who went to university. My first experience of a doctor was to sit in a shed in the village where his waiting room was, and my mother went in with me once, and he was eating pilchards out of a can with a fork while we were talking. And I got this romantic idea from, you remember Richard, I think it was Richard Gordon, who wrote the Doctor in the House books.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Basically, you read a few of them and you think, I could do with a bit of that. Anyway, I struggled along and ended up getting into guys, which was quite alien to me because the majority of the students there were from public school and I wasn't. The teaching was abysmal. There's very little that I learned in medical school. I only learned it on the job once I started practicing properly.
Yes.
There's a saying that 50% of what you learn at medical school within 5 years you has been proven to be wrong. The problem is you don't know which
You don't know
50%.
which 50% is.
Anyway, I did my house jobs. I did hospital medicine for a while, and in the 80s, general practice was doing pretty well. There were the job that I went after. There were 150 very highly qualified, good candidates for the job, and that was the standard in those days. They've gradually destroyed it so that there aren't people going into general practice, and they've really completely changed family medicine. That it isn't family medicine now. So I qualified the year that Margaret Thatcher came to power. I saw the writing on the wall then when you look into the background of people like Nicholas Ridley, who in 1977, as part of I think it was called the Economic Reconstruction Group, he wrote a paper about how to dismantle and get rid of the NHS, and this was Thatcher's ambition, although she found it quite difficult with a little bit of a fight in government, and so it went on. So I thought I ought to do my bit and try and stand up for what I believed in, which were the basic principles of the NHS. So I went into medical politics, didn't do any good. Went to BMA conferences, that didn't do any good. The one thing you learn is that this idea of your elders know better. I look back on my time and realise my elders didn't have a clue. If I fought them a bit harder, it might have been more an interesting sort of semi-political career. Anyway, Lansley comes along 10, 15 years ago, wasn't it? 2012 with his bill, which was greeted by the medical profession and a lot of other people as a great revolution. It was going to be fantastic. And I could see that it was going to be an absolute disaster. Now, most people do think it was an absolute disaster. But he came along and I bumped into a few like-minded people, and there was this little group called the National Health Action Party. So I joined them. Um, they were reasonably effective then. I think they still exist, but they're not in any sense effective at the moment. And in 2015, when Cameron was against Miliband, we put up, I think it was 12 candidates, and I stood for Parliament in the Maidstone seat. Again, didn't do any good. I got 8, but I did get 800 and something votes, about the same number of votes as pages in my book, funnily enough, which is curious.
Yes, there we go.
Yeah. And I got quite fed up after that because I thought I could see that the policies of the continued dismantling were going to continue. And I didn't really know what else to do. And then it dawned on me, write it down, get a message across. I hadn't heard of anybody that had written a book of this nature. There have been academic papers on the subject. There have been other sort of books on the NHS or casualty and all gory stuff like that, but nothing so political.
Yes.
So I beavered away, and I actually quite enjoyed it. I never intended to be an author, but it was quite fun. And it got bigger and bigger as I introduced more and more conspiracies and things from today, from the day-to-day scandals that we've all lived through.
Yes.
From the post-war period right up to the present day. So they were all incorporated to try and keep the reader's interest. And much to my surprise, a delightful publisher, the first one I approached, took it on board, and lo and behold, it ended up in print, and we've sold a few, and I've given away a lot actually, because the idea is to get the message across.
Yes. Yes.
As I mentioned to you earlier, the there's no profit in it. Any money and proceeds go to campaigns fighting for the NHS.
Right. Regardless that it's being salami sliced down and down and to eventually disappear.
Yes, exactly. That's a good way of putting it. The salami slicing, the clandestine idea of and scandal of the dismantling, as outlined in chapter 18. It was the facts that are in there are from um, books written by cabinet ministers that people might recognise, like Oliver Letwin and John Redwood, who wrote a book called Britain's Biggest Enterprise: Ideas for the Radical Reform of the NHS. And Oliver Letwin wrote a book called Privatising the World. The Adam Institute came out with a book called The Health of Nations, and these were all designed to come up with ideas as to how to get rid of this terrible, terrible socialist idea. Let's get Americanized because they must know better. Um, and Oliver Letwin actually wrote in his book, Privatising the World, that we can't possibly do this up front because the public won't have it. So we've got to do it in a clandestine way, sneakily, slowly, bit by bit, and as you say, salami slicing the NHS to death.
Yeah, and in the book, I just wanted to highlight some of these strategies that you've got here, so that and they're in something like 13 steps.
Mm.
I haven't got time to go through them all, but so there's some bits in here that people will no doubt recognise, as they start to think, hang on a minute, yeah, this is what's happened. So healthcare is a service. We must transform it into a business. And so much of service industry has now become a business. Even with the council, you've become a customer. And you think, hang on a minute, I'm not a customer of the council. When I'm a customer, that means I'm making an order. Step 2, starve the NHS of funds. Well, we're always being told that cutbacks are coming and this, that and the other, and governments are changing their tactics. And as I think you said, I can't remember now whether you said that before or after we started recording, about the funding systems and how deep they go. Step 3, cut training places and sell off land and accommodation. I mean, the steps go on and on, but you start to recognise them. Reduce beds, downgrade hospitals, close A&E departments, cut GP services, and blame lack of staff, which puts the patients at risk. And I did say in one of my emails, I had a book, I forget what it was called, but it was a design book. And it said, what would be life like if you designed certain services or situations that we have now as the actual design? And so if you were to take A&E, for example, and you were designing it now to be as it is, you would say things like, ensure that patients wait 8 hours. That would be part of it. Under stark lighting, ensure the coffee machine is switched off at 6 o'clock or there's no food facilities. Ensure that you've got to put in all your personal detail before anyone can put a plaster on you or anything. This is all observation and stuff that's been going on during your practice, presumably.
And to make sure people have to travel a fair way as
and
well.
Pay for parking.
Yeah, and parking. The plan has been for many years to reduce basically about 140 major accident and emergency departments down to about 40, and to reduce 7,500 GP practices down to 1,500. So, in other words, herding GPs into big hubs, which become quite impersonal,
Yes,
and
very.
about 40 or so big accident and emergency departments. Now, strangely, there are now 42 integrated care systems, which somehow seems to tally very nicely with their plan to reduce A&E departments down to about 42 in the country. We're talking England here.
Yes.
Integrated care systems, which people may not have heard of, and I fully believe a lot of MPs haven't got a clue what they really are. They're basically the final corporate hijacking of the NHS, which was produced by the 2022 Health and Care Bill. That was the final capture of corporate power grab, because there are 42 integrated care systems. We all are in one. They have a limited budget, or a capped budget. And the sinister thing that, again, people will not know is that when they were introduced, the Secretary of State removed the duty to provide secondary care. Now, think about that. Basically, what it means is there is no obligation on your health area to now provide secondary care for you. So, in other words, because they're then cash limited, when the money runs out, they can genuinely say, sorry, mate, we haven't got any money, you can't have your operation. And that's that. This started back with Lansley, because Lansley, one of the first things he did was to stop the Secretary of State's responsibility for providing healthcare for the nation and turn it into just facilitate it. And now it's gone on to integrated care systems, will provide primary care, but they've got no obligation to provide secondary care when the money runs out. And money, the boards of these integrated care systems have the hospital trusts, the local authorities, some GPs, and don't forget, some GPs now are run by corporations, and the private sector has quite an influence over these as well. And the money goes to shareholders, of course, if there is any money left over.
Yes.
So integrated care systems are what you're dealing with, and they're basically all separate businesses. So we haven't got a national health service anymore. It's not national and it's not a service. As you said, it's a business, and there are 42 of these. And they're beginning to put up their boundaries as well, so that if you get ill across the boundary, they don't want to, the one that
they won't touch you.
They don't want to pay for you. And there was a good example in Manchester where this happened, apparently. So these are the sort of things that are beginning to creep in, and they will directly affect, obviously, patient care.
Yes, and what with everything else that they're throwing at us, fluoride in water and various other things that are dumbing us down and making us ill, there's nobody at the end of it to actually give you any medical treatment, or what they give you is full of side effects.
This is I would term it the corporate capture of politics. I would say that this is not really original, what I'm going to say, but UK politics is a sort of oligarchs cocktail party with the ministers as waiters. They're sort of serving up the oligarchs what they want.
Yes.
And you talked about the privatization earlier of all the other industries. Chomsky's plan, or rather his description of how you privatize the world, which is what we wanted to do, is you first starve a service, the public get fed up with it, and they think that therefore private will be best. And that's happened with all the energy, telecom, railways, or whatever. They left the health service to the last because they knew it was the most difficult nut to crack.
Yes. So we'll all be lining up, paying through the nose on our direct debits on the never in case something happens.
Yes, and to show it's ideological and not financial, you got to realise how much, for instance, general practice costs the public. The whole of primary care, where 93% of the first contacts take place, takes just 7.5% of the NHS budget. And that is £155 per head per annum. So the public in England are getting their GP and all the primary care services for 42 pence a day.
Crikey.
Now, you can't get it any cheaper than that.
No.
And if they doubled it, which they ought to, it would still be under £1. And most people would be prepared for that. You're not going to get private medicine for anywhere near that.
No.
And to claim that they can do better financially, well, that exposes that they can't. Of course, so it must be an ideological reason for reducing and dismantling primary care, where GPs basically have gradually been de-skilled and taken over by paramedics, highly skilled paramedics, but nevertheless, it still means you see a different person every time. One of the most sinister things I think just before I retired was when the head of the my local primary care group knew that I was pretty angry about what was going on, and he came up to me and he said, "You do realise, don't you? You're no longer your patient's advocate. Your responsibility is to look after the primary care group and make sure we stay within budget. You are not there to look after your patient at all costs." In other words, they were destroying the doctor patient link.
Yes.
And saying you're no longer your patient's advocate. The beauty of most of my time in general practice was that I could fight for my patient, I could make a noise, I wasn't under threat. They couldn't get to me for making a noise about the lack of service or whatever. And now a lot of GPs are salaried. They've got to pay their mortgage. They're worried about their jobs, so they're not going to be so vocal as I have been over the years.
And I suppose as new doctors come on stream, they don't know this old system.
Well, exactly. There's a sort of thing called destruction of the legacy, isn't there? There's
Yes.
getting rid of all experts and things, and old consultants and old doctors. They're the ones who remember what it could be like.
Yes.
And the new generation are used to being controlled, told what to do, and told to keep their head down and not make a fuss. And no circumstances are they very keen to whistle blow when they know something is going terribly wrong, because their livelihood will be at stake.
Yes. Well, during COVID then, and the vaccine was being albeit mandated pretty much everywhere. Were you in practice then?
No, I'd given
No.
up, fortunately, by then.
You didn't have to make that terrible ethical decision. Do you think a lot of doctors? I mean, I think it's the European Commission or Union or one of them have just said that doctors will be blamed
Yes.
for the harms and things. Which, going back to what you said about, well, doctors, they just sort of don't really know what's going on in the bigger picture. They're being told there's a virus, and why would they disbelieve their seniors? Do you think that that doctors therefore should be blamed for instigating the vaccine?
I think it's a bit unfair, but they will be, because basically the bottom line that you're taught really from the word go at medical school, you put your signature on a prescription and you are the one who carries the can. You are the
Right.
one who has done it, even if it's done at somebody else's request. So when I first started, consultants used to ring you up and say, can you prescribe this for this patient? I think you'd do well on it. And if you trusted that consultant, you do what they said. But if you didn't, or you were a bit nervous about it, you'd say, "Sorry, no. If you want the patient to have this, you prescribe it, because I'm not
Well,
going
yeah.
to take the risk." And so the bottom line is, if you're administering that medicine, you're taking responsibility for it,
Yes.
even if you're doing it through lack of education, really, or ignorance in many ways, or because you just hear what everybody else is doing.
Yes.
As I said earlier, there was, COVID was a terrible business where the nobody really could trust what they were being told, and doctors were no better off than anybody else. And the media produced just as much education for doctors as anybody else, frankly.
Yes.
So they will get the blame. but I think it's slightly unfair in some ways.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So in let's talk about your book. What's the sort of general plot then of the story? What can we look forward to?
Well, the main character is a doctor called Rob Bajan, who's a very experienced NHS GP, and it's the only job he's ever wanted. But he's becoming more and more alarmed about the misery and the sickness he sees on a daily basis. And his concern really turns to anger when he realizes this is the direct result of government policy. And his patients are suffering, and his beloved NHS is being dismantled by political zealots. So he looks into this a bit. He realizes what's going on. He tries to kick up a bit of a stink. And he gradually realizes that a lot of this goes way back, even pre NHS. A lot of the opposition to the NHS before it was even conceived. And it goes on really to become a story about all the scandals of our era and our time, of which the dismantling of the NHS is the biggest. I can't say much more because I'd ruin the plot,
Yes,
actually.
but he goes on to investigate and then presumably tries to do something.
He tries to do something, and
We'll leave it there.
I'll leave it there. I'll leave it there.
And is it would you say it's a thrilling read?
Well, yes, and I don't say that to be boastful or whatever,
No, no.
because the people that my publisher and the proofreader both said that by about two-thirds of the way through, I had them in floods of tears.
Oh,
Floods of
wow.
tears because
Yes.
of what had happened, and it really got to them. The characters got to them, and the anger got to them. So, in that sense, it thrilled them, and that's why they were very keen to get it published.
Oh,
So,
brilliant.
I was
Yes.
quite proud of that. Yes,
Oh, no, fantastic. And as you say, it's 800 pages, so you do need a forklift truck or something to
yes,
pick it up and sit down and read. Now, a lot of people get put off by big books. I've been reading R.F. Delderfield and some of his wonderful books, and they're like 600 pages. But the thing is, once you get into the story, you don't want it to end. And that's the beauty of a large book rather than a very small book. It comes to and you go, oh, I could have enjoyed more. So when I see a big book and I think, well, if it's well written and if the story grips me, I'm going to enjoy this because it's many hours of reading, and I like reading. How long? However, I am writing a book, and I'm curious now about the whole writing process because everybody writes somewhat differently. How long, first of all, did it take to write, and what was the process? Were you making lots of notes, or did you just sort of sit there going, "I'm just going to start and let it all flow"? What's your approach?
well, having never been an author, it was made up as I went along. My first idea um, came while I was abroad, actually. And I got up in a hotel, jotted down the basis of a plot in one paragraph. By the end of the holiday, I'd sort of expanded that to ideas for about 20 chapters. It ended up as 80 something chapters. Um, I came back from holiday, and in a moment of boredom, I thought, right, let's start outlining something here. And I wrote the first few pages, and the old corny idea that you hear authors say these characters take a life of their own, I didn't believe, but they actually do.
They do, don't they? Yes, absolutely.
It got a life of its own, and I used to wake up quite enthusiastic about writing for a while, and I did a few hours, and then I got a bit bored. I wouldn't do it for literally a month or two, and then the Secretary of State at the time was Jeremy Hunt, and every time he said something really stupid, it galvanised me into action to write a bit more. and he was quite good at frequently saying something stupid. So
Yes.
it got me back to sitting at the desktop, typing away. And believe it or not, 800 and something pages was all typed on one finger because I'm not a typist either.
Gosh. Yes, I'm pretty much two fingers. I'm a
Yeah,
two-finger
yeah.
merchant.
So I went
Um,
backwards and forwards, and so if you condensed all the time it took to write, I'd probably say it took 6 months, but it was spread out over a year to
yes.
18 months, probably.
Yes, and then the whole business about having it proofread and things like that must the whole publishing process also takes a bit of time.
It took longer actually than writing it.
Oh right.
But they did a very good job, obviously, and there was quite a lot
Yes.
to deal with. So I'm not
Yes.
critical of that.
No, it's I mean presumably it's in hardback as well as paperback.
No, we printed a run like that
Right. Oh,
in
okay.
paperback from the word go because
Yes.
it was the cheapest way of doing it.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
And where is it available?
Oh, well, I would urge people, first of all, to go to our publisher, Strand Publishing UK, which is www.strandpublishing.co.uk, where they'll see on the website the other books of the publisher. But my book has, I think it's got 20 or so reviews. Have a good look at the reviews
Yes.
and get it from there if you can because, as I say, any profits are going to campaigns for the NHS, not into my pocket or the publisher's pocket.
Right.
In
Oh well,
many ways, unfortunately,
yes. Well, that is a shame because you've put all that work and effort into it.
it was a
Um,
labour of love.
And you're working on another book at the moment, so that you've
Yes,
been bitten by the bug of being an author. Then.
I have, but and I owe people a fair bit of money because after the first one, I bet quite a few people that I would never write another,
Oh,
and that was because I didn't have any ideas, and then suddenly
right.
something occurred to me, and I'll give you a very a two-sentence outline on the premise of another dystopian novel about how the country can where the country could be heading, and that is what if, as was expected, Winston Churchill won the 1945 general election after the war, and Clement Attlee was airbrushed from history. Now, as we all know, Clement Attlee had 6 years in power. He produced through NIBEV in the NHS. But my new book, is all about imagining a Britain with a minimal state, no NHS, as big business infiltrates to run the country, and the right wing slowly and surely take over control, which is they grabbed their opportunity from Winston Churchill being re-elected, not Clement Attlee. And
Right.
it goes on to the present time, slowly and surely. There's in the first book, I talk a lot about the pre-war appeasers. There was a club called the Right Club, who were a mixture of toffs and the establishment, people like the Duke of Westminster, the Duke of Wellington, who really were quite keen on Germany winning the war because they thought it would be better for England if they put Edward the Eighth back on the throne and got rid of any chance of post-war socialism. The Right Club is a real thing, or was a real thing, and I produced that into the second book as well, as an organisation that basically is there to control politics, control everything. And I found the research for that absolutely fascinating.
Yes. Oh well. So there we are. So that's and will that be another 800-page tome?
No, I've learned my lesson. And so is my delightful publisher, Janie. It's probably down to about 200, 250 pages. So it's an easy, that'll be an easy read.
Right. Yes. Yes. I mean, that's the thing, I suppose, is the condensing it down because you can go off into um, well, not, I was going to say flights of fancy, but because
Yeah,
it's all a flight of fancy to a degree. But you can go off and expand too much, and then of course
absolutely.
it becomes either too big to print, which is
Mm.
always an expense. You've got 800 pages to sort of put, and then expensive to post, but also it puts people off. Are you a reader yourself?
I am, but I'm a very slow reader, so it takes me quite a long time to get through books. I've just bought. I saw a documentary on Len Dayton the other day, and I went off and bought his book called Winter, which was published about 40 years ago. But that was fascinating because that dealt with pre-war Germany, which is interest of mine.
Right.
I do read a fair bit of the politics of the NHS. I got a stack of books here. You know, the NHS under siege. What's this one? The NHS for sale. NHS SOS.
Oh
These are the sort
gosh.
of things I read.
Yes.
Critical. NHS is critical. Loads of them.
Gosh. Well, yes. So, but had you did you read much fiction then before writing a fiction story?
Not, no, I can't say I did actually.
Yeah.
And it just and so how it turned out amazed me just as much as it amazed anybody else.
Yes. Well,
Um,
obviously got a natural bent for it.
well, it was. I think if you're enthusiastic about something and you enjoy it,
Yes.
that helps feed it, doesn't it?
You
Um,
said you said at the beginning that, or just earlier, you said that you typed it out on your PC. I was thinking a doctor writing a book in longhand might be very, judging by prescriptions.
wouldn't go
They
very
always
far. You wouldn't be able to read very much, would you?
what's he written? What's he written? Um, so yeah, so that will come out. Your new book will come out later on this year. Do you think?
Yes, hopefully by the autumn at the latest, and that will be available through Strand Publishing as well.
Right. So that yeah, no, that's really good. It's so nice to hear that. I mean, I'm optimistic about books at the moment because television is so full of rubbish, and people shouldn't be watching mainstream
Yeah.
media anyway
Mm.
because it is just this brainwashing. That actually books and audio books. I daren't ask you if there's an audio book.
About a year ago, I was approached to make an audio book, and then the producer of that became ill, unfortunately, and
Right.
so it never actually took off. I'd be keen if anybody's out there who's a good actor that's willing to read it for me, then I'd be very keen to employ them. So
Yeah,
to
well,
make an
I
audio
was
book.
asked, I was asked some years ago if I would read somebody's book, and it was an interesting story, so that helped, um, but because everything had to be done very perfect,
Yes,
every breath you had to take out and ums and ahs and of course I was just making so many mistakes. It took forever to do it,
absolutely. It
and
does
then
take a professional
you look
actor,
at the
really.
size of something like this, you think, oh my goodness, it would. There's a
Well, there's a
could
lot
you
of dialogue in my book, and I think that needs a good, skillful actor, doesn't it?
Absolutely,
Yeah,
yeah,
yes, yeah,
absolutely, and that what would really, in my mind, makes it if you've got somebody who can bring it to life,
yes, yeah,
which of course you've got to sort of have good range of voices to bring out.
you do.
But yes, I am hopeful that more people will start reading again, or at least listening to audiobooks rather than watching the telly, because it gives people like yourself a nice audience. Because somebody said to me, "Oh, writing's dead, don't you? It's there's nobody reads
Uh,
anymore," and
no,
that's a real shame
it
if
will
that's
never
true.
die. It will never die, will it?
No.
That's my hope anyway. Even with other things taking over now, like podcasts.
Yes, yes. I mean, there's nothing more, to my mind. There's nothing more relaxing than sitting down by the fire in a quiet house and picking up a book.
Quite agree.
Um,
Quite agree.
and
And good luck with yours, Richard.
thank you very much. Yes, it's certainly an eye-opening process, I can tell you, as you type it. Well, you suddenly realise that I realised that my grammar was really quite bad, and trying to write prose was very, very tricky. And you just go over it and you look at the text and you go, "There's got to be a better way of saying that. There's got to be a better way of
Yes.
saying." But once you've done a bit and you go, actually, I've enjoyed the challenge.
It is.
So
It is a challenge, isn't it? And
yeah,
a little secret. We don't tell anybody, but a lot of my
No.
research came off the internet, of course. And
Yes.
and to get those facts, there's no way I could have written that book 30 or 40 years ago because I'd have had to spend hours in libraries going
Well,
through different, trying to research different things. It would have taken me ages, but a
and
few clicks on the computer and you
I
found out the
know.
facts that you want.
I marvel at that now because when you look at some of those old books from years ago and you see these films where they're in the British Library and there's all these people doing research, you think, yeah, I know what they're doing. They're all researching their book and they've got to spend hours finding that information. Whereas you can just go, oh, what was the capital of so and so in and who was in power? Oh yeah, there we go.
Yeah, yeah,
It's
makes
we're
life
so
easy.
it's so easy. I shouldn't say that, as you say.
Yeah.
So yeah, so that's brilliant. So you'd recommend people. Obviously, we recommend people to go and check it out from strandpublishing.co.uk. I think you said it's
That's right.
probably in there.
Yes.
I'll put the link in the description.
Thank you.
And on the last note, then, what do you think is going to happen to the NHS? What's the future going to be?
Well, I'm still worried. I mean, the latest news, obviously, about the abolition of NHS England has hit the headlines. But I think, to be honest, it's in the long history of the demolition of the NHS, it's inconsequential. There's one Secretary of State that comes along and invents something like NHS England, and then another so-called useful idiot, which is how the city term a lot of our politicians, comes along and gets rid of it.
Mm.
And they've done the same with so many things, like GPs' right to refer. First they take it away, then they give it back, and as though it's their idea. And to link now, one of the latest ideas recently is, oh, well, everybody should have their own personal doctor. Well, they're the ones that took it away in the first place. So with people like that messing around with the NHS, it doesn't seem very hopeful. And there's a sort of profit orientated power grab
Yes.
cemented
We,
in the 2022 Health and Care Act that basically is heading the whole NHS towards a big corporate iceberg, as far as I can see,
and
and deliberately so, because there's a huge amount of money to be made out of the NHS. The Americans have saturated their own health market, and they see the NHS as a wonderful opportunity to
do the
come
same.
along and milk healthcare in this country, and it's going to cost us dear in terms of finance as well as health. Um, one, I hope I don't bore you with this, Richard, but it's something that's a bee in my bonnet. Um, the life expectancy of humans in England was 40 years old in 1850, and it's gone up to 80 or so now in 150 years.
Wow.
Do you know how many years medical advances have contributed to that extra 40 years?
How many medical advances?
No, how many years medical
How many years
advances
of
have
medical
contributed
advances to what to double the
to
average
double it?
age? No,
I'll tell you, four.
four.
Four. So, so in other words, the main reason for life expectancy to be nearly doubled is nothing to do with the medical profession, nothing to do with drugs.
Right.
It's to do with public health
Sanitary.
measures.
Right.
And the obvious public health measures: clean water, good living conditions, etc.,
Good
etc.
food. Yeah.
Good food. And so when the politicians cut public health, they cut, and they're afraid of tackling the food industry, for instance. They're actually complicit in condemning a lot of people to death.
Yes.
To not put too fine a point on it, because that they're the biggest influences over our health, not doctors, not the medical profession, certainly not big pharma,
No.
and the public, the cuts in public health have ended up with our life expectancy flatlining in the last 15 years, and worse than that, perinatal mortality of babies going up.
Yes.
Because of the austerity, etc. So that is, I'm afraid, that's one of the bees in my bonnet. and public health should attract a lot more attention than it does.
No. Well, no, I'm glad you mentioned that. And the other question, I suppose, which a lot of people are sort of hesitant and worried about, is things like AI
Yeah.
and robotic doctors.
Yes. Yeah. Well, this government seems to think that's the answer to everything. That produces AI, and it will, won't need doctors anymore, or social sighted, and it's got its place. Of course, it has, but it's got to be used properly and carefully.
Yes.
And you can't take away the human touch, can you? Or you shouldn't.
Well, this is it. I was going to say doctors and authors
Yes.
with AI.
Yes. Yeah.
uh,
Well, they'll be writing my next book, I suppose.
yeah, that's right. That's what somebody else said to me. He said, "Oh, you're writing a book. Are you using AI?" It's like,
Yes.
but you're right though. The human touch. I think that people, once AI becomes very, very prevalent in everything, and you see it on podcasts, and now people are making YouTube videos where it's basically scripted by AI. It's got AI voices, and it's bland. And you just start to go, hold on a minute, why am I watching this? And I think that people will still gravitate. And if go back to the family doctor thing, if somebody is practicing outside of the NHS, but say in holistic sort of alternative medicines and stuff, but I think that will grow because if people are not getting the service over here or it's been out financed to them, they can't afford it. And somebody is going to stick pins in you or massage you in a certain way or use hypnosis or whatever, and it's a lot cheaper and you've got personal service and again trust, aren't people going to gravitate to that?
Yeah. Yeah. It's human nature, isn't it? So you can see it developing in all sorts of ways through lack of belief, really, in a proper health service.
Yes. Yeah. So in a way, I think, I mean, I don't, what do I know? But in a way, just thinking about the human element, that if a corporation gets to be so corporate and becomes this sort of just one big business and that's all it's about, people, it will be its own death knell, really, ultimately.
Yeah. And it's something that's rarely mentioned with all the scandals, the maternity scandals, Shrewsbury, I think it was,
Oh, yes.
some of the
Yes.
others around. There's never a great mention of the corporate mentality that produced that in the first place. The hushing up of things, and
Yes.
it was a real corporate mentality, and the upper management are just basically like big business. They're there to protect themselves, and there's no sort of accountability, as there isn't in a lot of big business.
Yes. Just find your scapegoat and
Absolutely.
that's it. Oh, that it was him who's responsible. And it's funny, isn't it? That's when they all sort of like disappear. In the meantime, when everything's going well, it's the corporate enterprise that's doing the good stuff until it
Yes.
goes wrong, and then it's his fault or
And
her
then they
fault.
go off and get a job, move
Yeah,
ways to a job somewhere else.
yeah,
That happened in our area. There was a scandal about 20 years ago where the new chief executive was parachuted in. Her job was to save money and make it possible for a new hospital to be built. So what did she do? She sacked a load of cleaners. She closed a few wards, pushed the beds closer together, and then there was an outbreak of C. difficile, purely produced by her stupid ideas.
yes,
And so she eventually got a payoff and was sacked and went off and became a chief executive somewhere else.
yes. And I suppose in the end they must think that they are sort of somewhat godlike because even though tragedy has happened around them, it's almost as if I've been promoted for it
Yes,
somewhere else.
well, that's right. A success of failure. Yes,
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 yes, they believe their own publicity.
yeah.
Paul, it's been lovely to talk to you.
Been a pleasure, Richard.
It's been most enjoyable. The Deceit Syndrome, Dr. Paul Hobday, 800 pages of joyous entertainment, which will leave you full of excitement at the end of it.
Well,
I'm
there's a real
absolutely sure.
twist at the end.
A real twist. That's like a good proper book, isn't it? So well done, and good luck on the next one, which
Thank
we
you.
hope to see in the new year, or
Thank you.
but
Well, before
hopefully
that, hopefully.
before that. Yeah,
Yeah.
there you go, because it's less pages, isn't it? You can put your
Oh,
feet up a bit more often
yeah.
and
Absolutely.
enjoy all those technical books that you flashed up. Dear oh dear. Anyway, there you are, ladies and gentlemen. Wonderful book, wonderful man. Thank you for joining us in our wonderful interview. I will be back with more monologues and more wonderful interviews. But until then, from Paul and I, thank you, Paul. Good luck
Thank
with
you very much.
everything.
Thank you.
And we'll see you again soon. Till next time, bye bye.